Welcome back to the Saturday Show. Hour 2 of the program underway right now. I'm Jake Hatch. Thanks again for joining us. The Utah Forever 22 game just beginning up at Rice-Eccles Stadium. So Michelle Bodkin is up there covering that for the station. I think Serafita Simanu is, as well as I think PK might also be up there. So there'll be plenty of coverage coming on KSLSports.com, as well as we'll have it here on the KSL Sports Zone in the week ahead as well. But big thank you to all of you tuning in wherever you might be here on this Saturday morning. Hope you're all doing well out there. But let's talk a little bit about the Utah Jazz. Now, the Utah Jazz have been, let's be honest, they've been really, really struggling down the stretch here. Notwithstanding the fact that these past two games against the Houston Rockets and the Los Angeles Clippers, they have picked up 2 wins. So a 13-game losing streak wherein it looked like the Jazz were very likely to lose out. They bounced back with back-to-back wins. The regular season finale will be tomorrow in San Francisco against the Golden State Warriors. That'll be a 12:30 pregame, a 1:30 tip here on the KSL Sports Zone, to tune into that. But the thing about the Utah Jazz is we're all looking at this, and we understand that the Utah Jazz are going through a rebuild. It's clear as day. The front office, led by Danny Ainge as the CEO of the Utah Jazz, along with General Manager Justin Zanuck, which, by the way, I want to wish once again best wishes to Justin as he recently underwent a kidney transplant procedure. Hope all is well with him, obviously. But the Jazz have bounced back. They're now 31-50 on the year. Won the game last night, 110-109 over the Los Angeles Clippers. They beat the Houston Rockets the night before that, 124-121. So it's good to see the fight from this team and see guys like Luka Šamanić, Kenneth Lofton Jr. last night, 27 points. I think he had 20 of them in the first half. Very impressive stuff from these young players as they have shown some nice resiliency here as the season is winding down. But David Locke was on with DJ and PK yesterday on the KSL Sports Zone for his weekly visit, and he had a very interesting look at what the Jazz rebuild is going to entail from his perspective. And I actually subscribe to his theory here because he actually points to the Houston Rockets as to why the Jazz probably want to avoid doing what the Rockets did. Without further ado, I'll let David explain right here on the KSL Sports Zone.
The Jazz have a couple options going forward here. One is, stick with young guys, draft, keep building, try to hit on some draft picks and watch the young guys take off. The other thing is to add some veterans in the mix and try to speed it up. And I remember talking to you at the start of the season, you thought, okay, Houston's adding veterans into the mix and trying to speed it up, but adding the right veterans and how far can they really get before they bump into a ceiling? And the Jazz management's been real clear. They want their ceiling to be legit championship contender for multiple years. They've laid that out multiple times. Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks, that's adding $60 to $65 million, not just this year, but next year and the year after. That's a big chunk of the payroll right there. And they missed the play-in, which I think you were not very surprised by, judging by what you thought about their moves back in the fall. Do you look at it any differently now? Is this a real warning to Jazz fans who are thinking, hey, speed it up? Well, look what happened in Houston. Kind of analyze the Rocket season and how can they improve from here? Because if they do improve from here, no 1 year in a rebuild is that important as long as you get to the right place.
So I think a bunch of things here. This is a great question. So first of all, Fred VanVleet's contract is 3 years, $120 million, but the last year's not guaranteed. So it's really a 2-year, $80 million deal. So that one's super interesting to me. Do you sign, if you're the Utah Jazz, a 2-year, $80 million contract to DeMar DeRozan just so that you have some level of, relevancy and you actually can compete on a nightly basis? It's great. I think it's a great debate for you guys. Number two is I do think the Rockets had won 60 games in 3 years. 60 games in 3 seasons.
Yikes.
Their kids had not played a relevant, important basketball game. And so I think that's problematic. I think the fact that Jalen Green got better this year because he actually was playing games that matter with ramifications, and that Jabari Smith got better because he was playing games with ramifications matters. On the other end, they have Amen Thompson, Jabari Smith, and Jalen Green, who are all top 5 picks that they can build around for the future. And so now they've made the pivot to signing veterans. And I think there's something to that model that for 3 or 4 years you acquire young talent and you pivot. The last thing, though, I'll be really frank about when I look at the Utah Jazz, is like LeBron and AD are making probably one more run. Steph and those guys are making one more run. Minnesota's going to be great next year. OKC's going to be great next year. New Orleans is going to be great next. Like, obviously, pending mass chaos, which we really would like to see, probably, frankly. We would like every upset and mass chaos to take place here in the playoffs, so it disrupts things. But, like, Sacramento's not making the playoffs this year. And I don't think they're making the playoffs next year. And I can't figure out how we're possibly going to be better than Sacramento. So there is part of me that feels like I could go in front of Ryan Smith, Danny Ainge, Justin Zanuck, and Will Hardy and be like, hey, actually the answer is sign Lowry to an extension and don't do anything else. And really go to 20 wins and then draft and then start maybe at that point. But the West is just murderer's row right now. And I don't actually see a great path by which we're like certainly making the playoffs or even the play-in next year. Now, maybe something materializes, but if you're not going to do one of those two things and you don't have 3 years of 60 wins like the Rockets, then I'm not sure why you do that 2-year, $80 million deal just to be respectable. And so, I don't know. I can make a really, really strong argument. In fact, I think I'm kind of leaning that way right now, that if I were in the Jazz front office pending mass chaos, maybe the answer is that you're starting Keontae George, Bryce Sensabaugh, Collins, Lowry Markkanen, Taylor Hendricks, John Collins, Walker Kessler, with John Collins, Walker Kessler coming off the bench, and Colin Sexton coming off the bench, and I don't know what happens to Jordan Clarkson in that scenario. But, like, yeah. And that your 8th guy is one of your rookies and your 9th guy is one of your draft picks. And we're not very good. But I'm not entirely sure that's the wrong move.
How hard is it to be patient, though, for those guys?
Well, I think there's a direct correlation between how much pain you're willing to take. And the system is built in a manner where I do think there's a direct correlation between the amount of pain you're willing to take increases the amount of chance you have for future success. Right?
Yeah, I hate pain.
Right, I do. But, like, if you decide you just want to be the 10th best team, that's not that painful. It's mediocre, but it's not very painful. You're competing every night. You know, like Houston didn't have a very painful season. Yeah. Frankly, Golden State didn't have a very painful. Golden State's probably pretty engaged right now. They're going to close the year winning 9 of 10. And think they might make a run, and but and Golden State's maybe a little different because that's a bad example. But if you're building, that's zero pain. We can do that. But I don't think that's leading you to any chance to go on. To your point of the Rockets route to becoming a great team is Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, and Amen Thompson developing. That's it. Because Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet aren't. They can move your meter from 20 to 40. They just did that. That's cool. And good coaching moved their meter from 20 to 40. But Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks aren't moving your meter from 40 to 45. Those are hard wins.
Yeah.
But maybe they help
45 to 50. Like, that's where the Tim Conley trade for Rudy Gobert, I still think is a great trade by Minnesota. I think it's an absolutely awesome trade by Minnesota.
But maybe getting from
got him from, like, you can't get people to get you from 45 to 55. Rudy can get you there.
Maybe Houston getting from 20 to 40 helps their young guys develop, so the young guys don't get beaten down, have the bad body language, not hustle back on defense, because those guys need some wins mixed in. They need some positive feedback while they're struggling and learning, which is part of inevitably, most guys have to do that unless you're Tim Duncan. Well, good for you. But most guys have to do that. And to not get any positive feedback. I mean, I get why shoulders are slumped and the body language isn't good and the hustle isn't there. I don't think you can be okay with it because you'll never win if you play like that. But I do get why guys get beaten down. It's kind of human nature. And so for Houston not to get beaten down because, Van Vliet and Brooks are helping them get from 20 wins to 40 wins. They're getting some positive feedback. They walk off the court feeling good. That helps them put in the work to develop, and we'll see if it pays off down the line, but I get the logic to that.
And I think, and it gave someone for the rest of those guys to look at, like, well, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Like, how am I supposed to act? So I think that's super important. You go back to the 76ers in the beginning of the process, and they just had no adults in the room. But, on the other end, like, I do think they're a little bit of an outlier, and they've become everyone's favorite model, and I don't think it's a very logical conversation. But so Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, maybe he's just a unique bird, does go through 2 years of terrible losing. They were 20 and 60 for back-to-back years, and comes out of it as one of the 5 best players in the NBA, right?
You need the unique birds to win. That's what separates you from the teams. Great teams separate from very good because they've got that. All right, David.
So, yeah, I think it's a great – I mean, I want to make sure everyone – I think you and I are both right, and this is the crux of the difficulty of the process. And that is, I'm not sure the false run up the mountain is actually worth it just to look good. And you're absolutely right. Like, just getting your head beat in every night with no semblance of
hope
is not a great model either.
Yeah.
So it's really hard.
Well, maybe that's why they're paying Markin and Collins to be those guys. They don't have to bring them in. They got those guys on the roster to be those guys.
Yeah.
Be the professionals, be the grown-ups in the room, and be so good that you drag the team to 40 or 45 wins, and that's why you're getting paid the big money, because those guys are getting, assuming Markin gets this extension, that's big money for a lot of years.
Yeah, and you know what? John Collins and Dylan Brooks probably have a lot of similarities in kind of their level of play on teams, and Fred VanVleet and Lauri Markkanen probably have a lot of similarities. So to some extent, that's a great analogy. Good job. David, you're really good at this. When did you start doing this?
Every once in a while.
There you go, David Locke. And yes, I agree that the Houston Rockets are kind of the thing you don't want to do when it comes to this rebuild for the Utah Jazz. You don't want to put a quote-unquote, I'm calling it a facade on your rebuild. Bring in some veterans that essentially cover up what you're ultimately trying to do with the young players on this roster. But DJ had a very good point as well at the tail end of the piece of that conversation. And by the way, if you want to hear the entirety, that's about 9 minutes and change of David Locke. It was about a 20-minute conversation. You can go search out once again DJ and PK on the KSL Sports Zone and check out that entire conversation. David's always good every single week here on the show. But the bigger point is, yes, you don't want to have bring in some veterans to make it look like you're making progress, when you're really not. Let's be honest. What did the Houston Rockets accomplish this year? Oh, they finished a spot out of the play-in. Great. You're paying guys like Fred VanVleet, whatever the incredible number is. I think it was 2 years and $80 million guaranteed that David Locke mentioned. You don't want that. The Utah Jazz have veterans, as DJ pointed out, on this roster right now, who are the veteran voices in the locker room. They are the pros that are showing the young players how to go about conducting their business at the NBA level. That's good enough. And obviously, I think Lauri Markkanen, in my mind, should be a guy that's worth re-signing on a probably close to max deal, is what I would imagine it ends up being, if not an outright max deal for the Utah Jazz. But the thing with the Utah Jazz is they are trying to endeavor to build up what they like to say is a championship window that can extend for quite a while. And is that ultimately going to come to fruition? Only time will tell. And I know that it irks you as the lay Jazz fan out there, for us out here in the sports media to say, hey, be patient. We're not patient by human nature, just period. We are not patient beings out there. We don't want to sit idly by for 4, maybe 5 years with the hopes that if everything goes according to this master plan, that then the Jazz will be competitive. I have faith that Danny Ainge, Justin Zanuck, Ryan Smith as the Utah Jazz owner have a game plan in place that they can execute in the not-too-distant future. Does it get executed as soon as this offseason? Does it get executed next year? Is it 2 years down the line? I do not know. I wish I did, because trust me, I am as I'm as confused at times by what the Jazz are endeavoring to do and some of the moves they have made. But they want to create a true championship window for a squad. I think they are looking at the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Denver Nuggets as franchises they're trying to follow in those footsteps. And what do you mean by that, Jake? Well, look at what Oklahoma City and also Denver, more importantly, I think, have done. They have drafted young talent, they have molded it, they have allowed it to grow up and mature, and they have benefited from it. Denver's further along in their process, obviously by virtue of their most recent NBA title, the first in franchise history. The Oklahoma City Thunder this year finally look like the team I think they have been hoping to have for 3 and 4 years now. The Jazz are kind of in the beginning stages of that transformation. And the hope is that you can essentially have a rise similar to those two franchises, and this is just me speaking from my perspective of what I think the Jazz ultimately want to have work out for them. And if you can find the Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or the Nikola Jokic / Jamal Murray of your team, Jalen Williams or Oklahoma, like those star players that they have found via trades, more importantly, via the draft, that is how you're going to have to go about building what I believe will be a championship caliber squad here in Utah. Once again, is it going to be a very quick process? It doesn't seem like it. And sure, it's been, I'm sure, quite bothersome to have watched the Utah Jazz front office short-circuit this team 2 straight trade deadlines in a row. I completely get the frustration with that. But I've got to, I guess, just speaking to the positive side or the glass half full side of things, is I got to believe that Danny Ainge and the Utah Jazz have a game plan in place that they are trying to execute to open up an extended championship window for the Utah Jazz. Is that as soon as the back half of this decade? Only time will tell once again. But the issue is, how long are we going to have to watch what was some fairly putrid basketball down the stretch here in this season? Like I said, notwithstanding these 2 wins in the last 2 games, the back-to-back here, that's very impressive, and I will give the Utah Jazz credit for grinding out those victories. But it is still something that baffles me in so many respects, looking at what the Jazz ultimately are going to be able to accomplish in the near-term future versus the long-term future. And I would sure like to see them speed it up, but do it the right way. And maybe the speeding it up is exactly the wrong way to go about it, similar to what David Locke was talking about. But man, it is a thoroughly confusing time out there with regards to what the Utah Jazz are trying to do. This is a franchise that for so many years was synonymous with routinely winning 50 games and going to the playoffs and going fairly deep in those playoffs for decades, it felt like at points. So I can understand the frustration that Jazz fans feel, but let's all try and keep a little bit of a positive outlook. Look at me preaching to you, but here's the thing. The Jazz are trying to win. I'm not saying they're trying to dump every game out there and they're trying to be sucky forever. I hope not, at least. But the bigger point is I think the Jazz are trying to execute a game plan here, and it's led to some fan frustration. But the hope is that the short-term pain will be long-term gain for the Utah Jazz. And it's a weird deal, obviously, to keep track of it all. But coming up next, once again, by the way, regular season finale tomorrow. Golden State Warriors, Utah Jazz, 1:30 tip. That'll be a 12:30 pregame here on the KSL Sports Zone, also on KJazz and Jazz Plus if you want to tune into it and watch it tomorrow afternoon. All right, we will come back on the other side. We'll get into 5 minutes of talk about some of the other topics out there in sports. There's one that we have not touched on that I've been meaning to spend some extra time on, so maybe they'll dominate the conversation, but it involves obviously the Mark Pope departure from BYU. Where do things stand for the Cougars with regards to replacing him? We'll delve into all that as we continue on right here on the Saturday Show on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Welcome back to the Saturday Show here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Jake Hatch along for the ride on this Saturday morning, and it's time now for 5 minutes up. But we're probably going to spend a little more than 5 minutes on our first topic today. Let's talk about the BYU basketball program. Now, we talked about it earlier this week. Mark Pope has been hired as new head coach with the Kentucky Wildcats. He's on a 5-year deal, averaging $5.5 million a year. If you want to kind of do the math on that, he has got a $27 million contract, and frankly, right out of the chute, there were some BYU fans saying that, well, why wasn't he loyal to BYU? Let me just say this. Mark Pope played for the Kentucky Wildcats. He was a team captain of their 1996 national championship squad. He played for Rick Pitino. If there was one program that it didn't matter if BYU offered him a lifetime contract, $10 million a year, etc., that he was going to say thanks but no thanks to, it was the opportunity to go and coach in Lexington, Kentucky for the Kentucky Wildcats. He loves that program. It's been his dream job for years. I talked with enough people this week about Mark Pope in the lead up to him ultimately being hired for that job that told me, Jake, this is the dream scenario for him as a coach, and I can't fault him for wanting to go to Kentucky. So I wish Mark the best. I have worked alongside and around him since his time as a BYU assistant, his run through UVU as head coach there, and ultimately the past 5 seasons at Brigham Young University, and I wish him and his family well as they make the move now to the Bluegrass State to lead the Kentucky Wildcats. The bigger question now is, where does BYU turn with regards to replacing Mark Pope? And I will also say this, time is of the essence for the BYU basketball program. And any of you who know how BYU operates traditionally with hiring coaches, it's usually a drawn-out process, can take multiple weeks, if not a month, to get things done. But this is an era of collegiate sports, and especially with BYU being a member of the Big 12 Conference and the overly successful campaign they had this past year, finishing 5th in the Big 12 after being picked 13th out of 14 teams going into the season. You cannot afford to have this momentum that Mark Pope built for you year 1 in the Big 12. You can't afford to let it fritter away. And that is the concern I have for the BYU basketball program right now. If BYU administration and also the church Board of Trustees, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, if they are going to hold up this process and want to go through multiple rounds of interviews with candidate or with a candidate or candidates for this job, they are running the risk of having this entire roster, which looked quite strong coming back. BYU is projected as high as 10th in the way too early top 25 polls that came out in the aftermath of UConn's back-to-back national championship win on Monday night. BYU is considered to be almost a consensus top 25 team going into the next season. If you allow this to not fritter away, but if you allow this process to drag on and you have multiple people who feel like they should have a say in the matter, have interviews with whoever you're considering hiring, you are going to run the risk of having multiple players, if not the entirety of the roster, at least the major contributors, enter the NCAA transfer portal and go elsewhere. Some of them could end up in Kentucky with Mark Pope. We'll see how that shakes out. But we've already seen at least 2 who I think are maybe the 2 most key players on BYU's roster, NIL, not NIL-wise. They're leaving for NIL reasons, but the most important guys on the roster, I think, in terms of BYU system they ran this past year, and point guard Dallin Hall and star big man Ali Khalifa, those 2 have already entered the NCAA transfer portal, and they're looking at their options. This is what you run the risk when it comes to coaching changes, and why I believe it is absolutely imperative for the BYU basketball program to identify who is the leading candidate, get them through whatever rounds of interviews or interview that they need to go through, and get them hired. You've got to get a coach in place. Ideally, I think by midweek next week at the very latest, if you want to be able to keep this roster intact. I know I'm barking up the wrong tree by going out on open radio and essentially putting BYU on notice, but here's the situation. with NIL, the transfer portal, and just the overall free-for-all nature of college athletics, and in particular college basketball right now, BYU could find themselves being picked 5th in the Big 12 next year and finishing 13th if they let this process of identifying and hiring a new head coach drag on for multiple weeks, if not maybe a month here. You cannot afford to have that happen. Otherwise, once again, like I said, you're going to find yourself near the bottom of the Big 12, and it's absolutely legitimate this year, or speaking of if you have that roster fall apart. Mark Pope had put together a very, very strong group of guys, and if you can get the right guy in there, and we'll talk about candidates here momentarily who I think could keep that roster intact, but this is a shot across the bow of BYU administration. You got to get with the times. You got to speed up this process. Maybe they are. Maybe they are doing it behind the scenes and we just haven't been privy to that information. But I am sincerely hoping that BYU does not twiddle their thumbs and sit idly by while watching precious moments and precious time get away from them and see this roster fall apart. And that would be an absolute disaster for whoever ends up taking this job. Now, who ultimately could take the job, Jake? Well, that's a great question in and of itself. I am going to stump for my guy, Chris Burgess. I think Chris Burgess is the perfect candidate to take over this job at BYU. Yes, he does not have head coaching experience to this point in his college coaching career, but this is a man who has paid his dues. Remember, he was a highly recruited basketball star. He had that controversy down there at BYU with the whole comment from Roger Reed, you're letting down 9 million Mormons, when he didn't pick BYU. You know what? That's 30 years in the past. If you're going to hold that against him, I got another conversation we need to have off the air, I suppose. The thing is that Chris has been humbled, as PK mentioned, by this game. He had multiple injuries during his playing days. He played a long time overseas, and he has worked his way up methodically through the coaching ranks. This is a man who went into college coaching at the junior college level. He has paid his time. He has paid his dues and done his time. I mixed my metaphors there. He deserves this opportunity. Yes, Mark Madsen was, I thought, maybe the favorite in the clubhouse, but literally minutes, it was 15, 20 minutes after the official announcement came from the University of Kentucky of Mark Pope's hire being made official down there in Lexington, there came a statement on Mark Madsen's Twitter feed saying, hey, I am committed to Cal. Me and my wife, we're excited to be here. We want to be a part of the Golden Bears and the build that we're undergoing right now. He didn't outright say that I'm not interested in the BYU job, but I think the timing of that all but said that for BYU, and in many respects, it actually allowed BYU to essentially say, okay, well, we can cross Mark Madsen off that list. Let's move on to the next candidate, and I believe that the favorite should and is Chris Burgess, and we'll see. I am very interested to see where things ultimately stand when this all shakes out. But I would love to be back here midweek next week at the latest. Monday maybe would be ideal, I feel like, for BYU to be making an announcement that we're excited to hire Chris Burgess as the next head coach of the BYU basketball program. And why do I think Chris Burgess is the right hire? Well, because he has got a lot of ties to BYU, having spent time helping Mark Pope build what he built in Provo. He's recruited a number of the guys that are on BYU's roster currently. He could have he could get into the ear of a guy like Dallin Hall and say, hey, come back to BYU and play for me. Colin Chandler, I'm sure that he could help secure him coming home off of his mission to join the program. Who knows? Maybe there's some guys on that Utah roster that maybe would follow him to Provo. That is all absolutely in play. I do know that Chris Burgess is very highly thought of in recruiting circles. Other coaches at the prep, junior college, and other ranks, they like how he operates. He is a very, very good recruiter. Obviously, he's going to have to sharpen up his X's and O's, but that's the thing I think he's been working on most the last 2 years, in particular at the University of Utah as the associate head coach under Craig Smith, is sharpening up operating as a head coach, albeit not standing up all the time. He's been working on the bench, but I'm sure he's been observing Mark Pope, obviously working alongside Craig Smith. He's been observing how they operate as head coaches, and I believe this is the time for Chris Burgess to step into the limelight and get his shot as a head coach. Yes, it's a step into the unknown for BYU, because until you really are that guy, you don't really know if guys have that it factor to them when it comes to coaching. But it screams to me, and like I said, I'm biased in this respect because this is just my thought process on how I think BYU should operate in this coaching search. But I believe that you could do a lot worse than giving an opportunity to Chris Burgess. He understands what BYU stands for, having worked there and recruited for that university. I know he didn't play there. I know that he played for the hated Utah Utes. He was a rival of BYU's during his playing days, at least the last 2 years of his career, because he started out at Duke. That's all water under the bridge at this point, to me. And I would hope that BYU gives a strong, long look, and if it can be managed, hire Chris Burgess and hire him yesterday. Just get it done. Now, other candidates on the list, I think the next guy, if for whatever reason Chris Burgess does not float the boat for BYU, I think it goes to UNLV Associate Head Coach Barrett Peary. Barrett, as many of you might know, is a native of Payson, Utah, played his college ball at Snow College in southern Utah before embarking on a coaching career that took him ultimately to a head coaching position at Portland State from 2017 to 2021. Didn't necessarily go all that well, and he was let go, but he has worked at Texas Tech in the Big 12 ranks. He was most recently working at UNLV, and he has got a very long coaching resume. Is it time for him to get a second look as a head coach? Can he make that step up to the Power 5 level and take what he learned from his short stint at Texas Tech in the Big 12 and bring that to BYU? TBD. But there are other names out there. I'm sure many of you are wondering about Alex Jensen and or Kevin Young, who are they're not career guys in the NBA, but they've been in there for quite a while. Both of them natives of the state of Utah. Both of them have extensive resumes in the NBA ranks. And maybe I said, did I say NFL a minute ago? I apologize if I did, but NBA assistants. And if they are interested in this job, great. But PK, Patrick Kinahan, who I trust with what he says a lot because I know the caliber of people he talks to. He essentially said yesterday that Alex Jensen is not interested in this job at BYU. So you can kind of cross Alex Jensen off of that list. I think a similar situation exists for anybody else working in the NBA. Why do you want to step away from a league where you're coaching the best athletes in the world and then have to go and jump in and recruit year-round, deal with NIL demands from athletes, and also have to worry about the transfer portal and re-recruiting your roster literally seemingly month by month, if not every 4 or 5 months? It's not an ideal scenario for a coach, but we'll see how BYU navigates here. And I'm looking forward to seeing who they ultimately hire. But if they were to ask me, and I will also be very honest, they will never ask me because I don't think they value my opinion for much of anything. But alas, if they did, I would tell them the guy is Chris Burgess, and you needed to hire him yesterday and get the deal done because you need to keep this roster as intact as humanly possible. And every moment, every hour that you take to let somebody else who wants to have their thumb in the pie to make that decision slow down the process, it's costing BYU valuable moments when they could be building a roster that I think can absolutely be in the mix at the top half of the Big 12 next season. So don't let this momentum fall by the wayside, BYU. Get on it. All right, a couple other things real quick before we take our penultimate break here on the show. Do want to mention also in terms of the RSL/Utah Royals side of things on soccer, this is 5 minutes of, so we'll hit those real quick. Real Salt Lake is back in action tonight, riding a 3-match unbeaten streak, most recently tying 1-1 with Minnesota United. Tonight, they are back home at America First Field, and they'll be taking on the 2023 MLS Cup champs, the Columbus Crew. Cucho Hernandez, one of the best players for Columbus, got a red card last week, and he will be unavailable for Columbus in this game tonight. I am not going to be on the broadcast tonight. For those of you wondering, I've got some family responsibilities, but Spencer Warren and Lauren Beck will have pregame coverage for you coming up at 6:30, 7:30 first kick out there at AFF, and if you want to get tickets, you can go to RSL.com. Last night, the Utah Royals lost 1-0 to the Orlando Pride. Marta, the Brazilian legend, tallying the only goal in the game. So tough loss for the Utah Royals. But I think Amy Rodriguez's squad this season, it's more about getting what is one of the youngest. Is it the youngest? It might be the youngest in NWSL, the National Women's Soccer League, in the entire league. It's about getting them all on the same page this season. I don't think any of us had any illusions, those of you that are soccer fans, that the Utah Royals were going to be world beaters in their re-debut here in Salt Lake City, but tough loss for them against the Orlando Pride. They'll be back in action next week as they take on Racing Louisville. That's quite a name, as they head out to the Bluegrass State to take on their fellow NWSL club out there in the Midwest. All right, so there you go. That's what's going on in soccer, and it's just kind of an interesting time with we're transitioning into the summer months. So it's kind of funny how things slow down here at the station, but at the same time, we talked about hockey earlier today. Things pick up in spots that you don't necessarily anticipate them, and it feels like this is going to be the summer of hockey for Utah sports fans out there, but it's a fun time. I love what I do. I say this all the time on social media. I say it on here often. I love working in the media. I love covering what I do, and I love representing the state and talking about what you want to talk about here on the Saturday show and my other opportunities to talk on the KSL Sports Zone. But it's going to be an exciting summer. A lot of us, yours truly included, will be learning a lot about hockey, it feels like, with the impending move of the Arizona Coyotes to Salt Lake City. I am very curious what the rebrand will look like, the nickname that they will pick for this squad. Will it be a Utah whatever, or will it be a Salt Lake City team? How are they going to name it? There's a lot to watch for in the coming days, quite literally. I'm expecting an announcement as soon as Thursday from Gary Bettman, the National Hockey League commissioner, about the change in terms of selling the franchise to Ryan and Ashley Smith, and having the Coyotes move north from Arizona to Utah to call the Delta Center home for the interim. What is the plan for a new stadium? Will that be forthcoming with regards to plans on that? Are they going to renovate the Delta Center where it stands for a second time? And I think it's maybe it's 10 years at this point. We went through it when we were working over there in the Delta Center with the Zone, but there's some crazy times it feels like coming for Utah sports fans. But get ready, folks. Let's embrace it. Let's embrace this hockey team as they come to Salt Lake City. And I think it's going to be a very, very fun time to be a sports fan here in Utah. And I'm on board. Trust me, I'm going to be as big a hockey fan as I possibly can be. And once again, it's going to take some study for me to get up to speed, because I can't even tell you for the life of me. If somebody were to say, Jake, you can win $1 million if you can explain to me what icing is right now, I wouldn't be able to do it. I would lose out on that money. That's how much of a greenhorn I am when it comes to my hockey knowledge. But I will say come the open of the NHL season in October, I would hope I'd be able to explain that as well as a few other things when it comes to hockey. But we'll see where things stand at that point. We'll be doing the show here, so maybe we can revisit that in 4 or 5 months' time. All right, we will wrap up today's edition of the Saturday Show. Coming up next, some final thoughts as we wrap it up here on the KSL Sports Zone. So stay with us right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Welcome back to the Saturday Show here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Hope you all are doing well out there wherever you might be. A big thank you to all of you for tuning in on today's show. Rolling solo is never easy here on the show, but the nice part is we've had a lot of topics to talk about today. We've talked about the impending move of the Arizona Coyotes coming back to Utah, and once again, let's get ready for that announcement coming as soon as this Thursday, it appears, on that front. We've also talked about the Utah Jazz, back-to-back wins as they're going into the final game of the regular season. There is an offseason ahead for this Utah Jazz squad that I think holds a whole lot of intrigue. What are the Jazz going to do in the NBA draft? Are they going to take multiple players in that draft? Will they bundle some assets together, including other future first-round picks, maybe go out and trade for a player they believe can be a part of their core? There is so many options on the table here for the Utah Jazz. I'm looking forward to that. And just other summer sports. The Salt Lake Bees, by the way, have won 4 of their last 5 as they start the season, and it's been fun to hear Tony Parks on the call as the new play-by-play voice of the Salt Lake Bees, and you'll hear plenty of him upcoming this spring and summer here on the KSL Sports Zone as they play out their season. We've got Real Salt Lake. We've got the Utah Royals back in action. There's a lot going on. And by the way, speaking of soccer, before we wrap up today's show, I probably should have fit this into technical fouls, but I found it right after we got done with that segment. April 12th is the dateline. This comes from UPI, United Press International. A fan, this is the first sentence. A fan uncoiled a whip and used it on striker Abdurazik Hamdallah after Al Ittihad's lost Al Hilal in the Saudi Super Cup finale in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, earlier this week. The incident occurred when Hamdallah exchanged words with a man who was talking to him from the stands Thursday at Mohammed bin Zayed Stadium. In this game, Brazilian midfielder Malcolm scored twice in a 4-1 win for Al Hilal, and then obviously this incident played out. Folks, why in the world are you taking a whip to a soccer game? That's the thing about this. I'm trying to figure out. The man says that Hamdallah, scored the only goal for Al Ittihad in their loss here. He went on to near the man in the stands before throwing water from a water bottle onto him. The man then used his left hand to pull out his whip, hitting Hamdallah several times. Once again, why does this gentleman have a whip at a soccer match? I don't get it for the life of me. It's just crazy scenes. I need to go find the video of this and watch this play out if it exists. I assume it does. Everything in the world, it feels like, has video associated with it these days. But man, soccer remains just an absolutely insane sport. There are so many unique things about that sport in and of itself, and just what are you doing? You know, I'm going to go to a soccer match today. I'm going to bring my whip with me, and I'm going to use it on a professional soccer player. Where does that come from? Like, where do you get that mind? I don't know. For the life of me, I do not understand it. But alas, that's what played out over in the United Arab Emirates earlier this week between two professional soccer teams. It's just, bizarre stuff. All right, one other thing before we go here I wanted to talk about. It's on the college sports, college athletics side of things. So Troy Dannon, the new AD at Nebraska, he says he expects revenue distribution in college sports to become more performance-based over time, resulting in what he calls an eat-what-you-kill model. Now, Dannon was hired at Nebraska last month after less than 6 months with Washington. He told ESPN that the future model for the college football playoff mirrors what will happen around the greater college athletics landscape. Of course, last month, the CFP and ESPN agreed to a $7.8 billion contract over the next 6 years with a revenue distribution plan that gives the Big Ten and SEC schools the most money, $21 million annually, as well as significantly more. It is significantly more than teams from the Big 12, the ACC, and obviously the G5 ranks. But as he said here, there's going to be some meritocracy versus more of a social approach to revenue distribution. You'll eventually see that within the leagues. You'll eventually see that across sports, maybe other than football. And eat what you kill in some respects, that mentality. It's going to be much more performance-based and outcomes when it comes to generating the revenue necessary to compete. The CFP decisions that have been made so far show that. Now, Troy Dannon, I think, is trying to essentially posture and say that, hey, we're Nebraska, we're going to be in the mix here, but he's also kind of putting like a warning shot, I think, across the bow of big dogs in the Big Ten. Speaking of the Michigans, the Ohio States of the world, USC, I'm sure, is going to consider themselves that as a member of the Big Ten Conference, which, by the way, still, the fact that USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon are going to be in the Big Ten, just baffling to me. It's just, it doesn't sit right with me. It never will sit right, it feels like. I'll get used to it at some point, but it does not make much sense. But I think that Troy Dannon's essentially trying to strike out right now early on in his run at Nebraska and say, hey, I see what you guys are trying to do. I see that Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, you guys think you're going to essentially throw your weight around and get more money from the conference. Well, guess what? We're Nebraska. We're also going to be in the mix here. Now, he makes a very good point, because I do think that the big dogs in these conferences are going to try and pull this off. They're already doing it. He already mentioned it. What the college football playoff did with not being a flat rate across the board for all the power leagues, where essentially the two biggest leagues are getting the most money. The next two leagues, including the league that BYU BYU and Utah will call home this fall in football, getting, I think it's $12 million per team, according to what the payouts have been scheduled for from the playoffs. So it's $9 million less than the schools in the Big Ten and the SEC. Yeah, it is a meritocracy out there in college sports, but at the same time, man, I just don't know if the future of college athletics can hold up with that happening. Because let's be real, if the Ohio States, the Michigans, who have already got extremely, extremely deep pockets, essentially demand and take more from other teams in those leagues, let's look at the other teams. Let's look at the Northwesterns of the world, the Marylands, that type of stuff, the Rutgers out there in the Big Ten, and say that, okay, yeah, you guys are going to take less while these guys get more, even though they already have more. That doesn't necessarily bode well, I think, for the future of college athletics. But there's a lot going on in college athletics I think don't bode well for the landscape in college athletics in general as well. So maybe I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here, but it's a really, really weird vibe going on in college athletics right now. And we'll see if Troy Dannon was prescient with what he said there, if he is forecasting the future, or if it becomes, like he said, goes back to maybe more of a social approach versus that meritocracy type approach that he believes will take over here. All right. I am going to step aside now. So big thank you to all of you for tuning in. Like I said, it's both thrilling and a challenge to do a radio show on your own, but I appreciate each and every one of you have tuned in all day long. If you missed any part of the conversations that we've had on today's show, you can podcast it. Search out the Saturday show wherever you get your podcast. It's also available on YouTube, as far as I am aware, as well. Go to the KSL Sports channel. You should be able to find it under that. But once again, a big thank you to all of you for tuning in. Big thank you to Christian for producing today. And Michelle and I will be back next week. By the way, we're going to be on location next week. We're going to be out at Mulligan's, 106 South. You guys know exactly where it's at. We'll be out there for the Uinta Golf Demo Day. If you want to hit some new clubs and see if you need to upgrade or switch out your set of golf clubs, come out and do it. Say hi to us. I believe we're going to have some vouchers for some free food, as I understand it, as well. They'll have some food vendors on site. At least they did the last time we did this. So looking forward to that. I'll be 10 to noon next week, once again, out at Mulligan. So make plans to stop by right now, and we'll see you guys next week. All right. Once again, that'll do it for this edition of the Saturday Show. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. Once again, I'm Jake Hatch. Have a great rest of your Saturday right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.